Regardless of the sunlight on the sea, the businessman discusses stocks and shares. Regardless of the whisper of the waves, ladies compare the prices at the sales. And some are old, but still cling on to life. And some are young and wonder what it's for. For some, this is the first time they've been down. For others, perhaps the last. For more and more, it's a first view of England and its coast. I wonder what that lady used to do, so unattracted to the sleeping youth. A cook, a missionary, a lady don, and is she self-sufficient or afraid? On Sunday morning, matins or morning prayer, the Mass or Eucharist, whichever they like to call it, is over in Bosham Church. But still she paints, forgetful of the time and food and other people. Absorbed in what she sees, she puts it down. Happy, contented, quiet, competent.
John Betjeman wrote the script for this film here in this cutting room back in 1972.
Under those stones, the local farmers lie. Their old brick houses mostly have been bought by businessmen who mess about with boats. The old church looks forlornly from the shore, and very curious things it seems to see. What explanation can there be of this?
Ted Roberts, the film's editor, and I have both worked with Betjeman on many occasions, often puzzling with him over what on earth to say next.
I wonder why that man is wearing tails. Those two rugged workers may well be retired admirals. Such is the camaraderie of the sea. Just to anticipate any trouble, take a letter from Wheelhouse Grange, Albatross Lane, Havant, to the chairman of the governors, BBC London. Sir, I was disgusted to find the BBC had had the effrontery to turn its cameras onto the private marine activities of our English coast, and what is more, on a Sunday morning when they should all have been in church. My aunt, who is not an expert oarswoman, was shown on the screen without her permission. My own picnic party, with my niece and daughter, was also filmed without permission, as was the party of my staff who were on holiday at Burnham-on-Crouch. How would you like to have the private moments of your family life shown to millions and commented on facetiously by a man with an unpronounceable name? Is nothing sacred? There are many good sailors at the yacht club. Why did you only select shots of incompetent amateurs? And why this emphasis on food and drink? Are you in the pay of the breweries, sir? What will foreigners think if this film is shown abroad as depicting the English way of life? Do we only live for pleasure? Surely on Sunday, at least a reverent expression might have been shown somewhere. And I have one final and very serious complaint to make. The wife of my managing director kindly came down to the shore to meet me, and your cameraman took the unpardonable liberty of filming her as she was getting ready for the bridge party to which we were going. Yours, etc.
Do you remember, John?
I do. I think we just keep that in, don't you?
Well, it is it.
Yeah, it's frightfully funny.
It started as a joke, actually, because I think you got stuck. You didn't know what commentary to write.
There's all these various shots of boats and people eating lunch. And,
Yeah.
so,
Dorinda, you know, she lives in that kind of thing.
Your secretary.
Yes,
Yeah.
Liz, yes.
But you know the line about my aunt, who's not an expert on
Yes.
women. I had a letter about a year ago. It was about 4 years after the film was made. I've got it here. Shall I read it to you?
Yes.
Because I never told you. I have for a long time felt I must write to you regarding your excellent programme, Thank God It's Sunday, shown on television quite some time ago. I happen to be the lady in the dinghy about whom you remarked, take a letter, my aunt, who is not a very expert oarswoman, objects to being shown on television without her permission. I would like to explain. My husband and I were returning to Itchenor. The dinghy was driven by an outboard motor, and at the time we were being photographed. The engine had been switched off as the water was too shallow. Also, it was too shallow to be able to row, so I had to dig the oar into the gravel to ease us along to the shore. Hence the obvious opinion of me not being a good oarswoman. Quite honestly, I was delighted to be seen on television, as was also my husband Donald. Many of our friends saw the programme. By the way, the two men walking across the something, of whom you said could have been admirals, were scrubbers and painters of boats. Or maybe boat builders. A most interesting and enjoyable programme. We would love to see it again. Perhaps the television people who put it on then could be persuaded to do so again.
Well, that's very gratifying.
That's nice, isn't it? But that kind of letter that you made up, John, I mean, we do get letters awfully like that.
Good, yes. I love them. I think they always ought to be critical and about details and can't possibly be answered back. And they ought to leave one ashamed and bewildered.
This film, one of a series of 26, was made for ITV in 1955.
We're on the main road from Stow-on-the-Wold to Chipping Norton. There's a signpost saying Chesilton House 16-3. Turn off and we're in deepest Cotswold quiet. No poles or wires to spoil the scene. The paddock, the church, golden stone, weathered by centuries of sun and rain, the gateway arch, and there it is, Chesilton House, a royalist stronghold of the civil wars. In the dining room you can get the feel of the place. The same family has lived here, the Joneses, since the house was built in 1603. So there are treasures of all dates laid out for you to see. And this Jacobean ceiling hangs over the great chamber. Marble chimneypiece, Chinese lacquer cabinets, and on the wall, what is generally considered the finest panelling of its date in England. I said the family was royalist. Let's go and look at a mystery of the house. Arthur Jones fought for Charles II at Worcester. The Roundheads followed him here. He rushed up to this room, through that secret door, which was then hidden in tapestry, crossed this little room, and hid himself in this cupboard. The Roundheads couldn't find him. Meanwhile, his wife, Mistress Jones, put a drug into their beer, and when they were asleep, Arthur Jones escaped. Here he is. His portrait hangs in the entrance hall, and all those weapons and armor you can see hanging on the walls belonged to the Jones family, which was loyal to the Stuarts and fought for the king. And on that long table is the greatest treasure in the house. It's the Bible which King Charles I used on the scaffold. It is bound in orange leather with the royal arms stamped on it in gold. What I am holding now, Charles I held as he stepped out to the block in Whitehall. These pages were the last the royal martyr saw. Loyalty to the Stuarts. Cheselton was loyal, and the sign is this Scotch fir in the garden. Cheselton is 5 miles from Chipping Norton, which is 46 from Birmingham and 74 from London.
May I please send you this letter to ask you a very great favour?
Yes.
Because for many years I've been more than interested in reading and listening to poetry, and I've subsequently begun to write some myself. With this in mind, may I please ask you if you could read the example I have enclosed and give me a rough idea as to the standard I've reached. And please give me some advice.
Liz Moore has been Betjeman's secretary for nearly 3 years.
But please, if you don't have the time or constantly inundated by such requests, feel free to ignore my request because I appreciate what a busy man you must be. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to read this letter, and may I wish you and your family all the best for the future.
Oh, that's very kind.
Do a lot of people send you their poems, John?
Yes. And they always mean a tremendous lot to the writers of the poems. And one doesn't like to dismiss them lightly.
What if they're no good? I mean, what do you say?
Doesn't scan, you can say. It's quite hard to scan. What you leave out is half the battle.
Because it must be terribly important to the people who send them in
It
what
is.
you say, and yet you've got to be honest, haven't you?
Yes, very important indeed, yes.
Do you always answer every letter you get?
We try to, yes.
Yes,
How many letters do you get a day, roughly?
Average, I should think, about 20, don't we?
yes. If people have taken the trouble to take out a pen and write to you from their heart, however bitterly they feel,
Yes.
I think you have to acknowledge it.
And of course, quite a lot of poetry is sent in.
Mm.
That's more time-consuming than anything, really, isn't it?
Yes.
And then requests to do things?
An enormous number of requests to become patron of this or president of that or give a lecture or a reading or...
Yes.
You get a lot of that, don't you?
Do you find it a burden, John? I mean, it must be a big part of your time then spent answering all these letters.
Well, it's every morning.
Do you mind that?
No. I'd be rather disappointed if it didn't come in.
Candida Lycett Green is John Betjeman's daughter. She's married, has 5 children, and is a writer and filmmaker herself. This visit is to discuss with her father the book she's written on English cottages and his contribution to the introduction.
Categories. I mean, I've got to write essays on each one.
Yes,
Then you'll know what's left to write in the introduction, really.
yes.
Dad, then the last category is arts and crafts,
Very nice.
which I'm very much enjoying looking up. I go to the RIBA and look things up there.
Yes. It's very hard to find facts, isn't it, in the RIBA?
Yes, there's a terrific lot of people in gym shoes and anoraks.
Doing what your mum calls research.
Yes. And I get terrible paranoia in there, because they're all writing very, very fast and know exactly what they're doing, and I don't even know how to find the books. I keep having to go and ask the librarian how you find them. I can't understand their system. It's incredibly complicated.
They always make it out that it's really very simple, if only you knew.
Yes.
But you don't know.
I'm obviously going to get attacked by all the proper sort of academics.
Yes, that'll be nice.
Mm.
Have you written any poetry?
No, not so as you'd noticed.
Yes, you have.
Well, my favourite thing in the world is doing song lyrics. I've got 4 songs on record. I'm a member of PRS. It's my
What's
proudest.
it? Performing Rights
Rights,
Society.
yes.
How marvellous.
Oh, it's so exciting. I get reams of information from them every month. And my records make about £4 a year. And they
Very
get played
nice.
in Bulgaria and places like that.
What was he like as a father, John, when you were a child?
Non-existent.
Made me laugh a lot, still does. Yes, he tried to put us onto old churches, as we used to call them. Not another old church.
Did it not put you off them, or not, in the end?
No, it didn't. It did at the time. From about sort of 8 to 14, I resented them terrifically because they involved making journeys wherever we were going far longer.
Yes.
I mean, if we were driving to Cornwall, it took about a week. We stopped at every single church. Not another old church. Do you remember when we had a revolution in Exeter Cathedral?
Oh, yes. Yes, wasn't that marvellous?
Yes.
What happened?
We just walked, Pally and I walked out and disappeared and refused to look at it.
Yes. What about poetry? I mean, did he get you keen on poetry, or again put you off?
Yes, no, he didn't overdo it. He would just, he used to read it a lot out loud, so it sort of got in one's blood without one realising it, I suppose.
Yes.
And a lot of reading out loud. You were incredibly good at reading Carrot's Just a Little Boy and Mrs. Molesworth.
Oh, I like any story, yes.
John Betjeman also has a son, Paul, now a musician living in America. Betjeman's wife, Penelope Chetwood, writes too, usually about India or horses. As a family, they lived in Berkshire until 1972. Betjeman has suffered from Parkinson's disease for several years now. It mainly affects his balance and therefore his ability to walk. But he still very much likes to get around, to look at things. I took him back to Smithfield in his beloved city of London. He had a flat here for many years, returning to Berkshire at weekends. Many of Betjeman's poems are about London, its architecture, its people, its churches. He was born in Highgate in 1906, an only child, deliciously apart, misunderstood, and not like other boys. So he described himself in his verse autobiography, Summoned by Bells.
I lived in Cloth.
Did you like living in the city?
Loved it. It was, if it hadn't been for the noise of the refrigerating machinery on the tops of the lorries at night,
Yes.
I'd be living here now.
Because, yes, I mean, the market, of course, comes alive at night, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, and it's terrific noise at night.
What did you like about it, living in the city?
The alleys, that there was no uniformity, no straight lines, plenty of informality, and great camaraderie. I was always losing my keys, and I used to have to borrow from the city police or from the fire people a ladder to get up into my room. It didn't matter at all.
Because not many people live round here, do they?
No, about 36, I think.
Did people used to... I mean, people obviously lived in the city much more in the past.
Yes, the disadvantage of living here alone was that if people called, they need never leave, because here you were, islanded.
Yeah, yeah.
And they got to.
Yes. And Bart's, of course, you knew
That
well.
was marvellous. Having Bart's Hospital made you feel absolutely safe.
What do you feel about what's happened to the city? Are you sad about all the new building that's taken
Well,
place?
here it's absolutely lovely, thank
It's all right,
goodness.
isn't it?
It retains. I don't like that
Yeah, what
new thing you
What
can
is that?
see.
Is that...
That's a new Barbican.
Oh,
It's
yes,
rather inhuman, kind of. I remember it was taken very seriously when it first went up after the war, as people thought the new age had come. And this was no longer the city. What was going to be was to be a great communal space with no point in it. It's the beginning of the rot. I don't think it'll go on.
But when was this building built?
Oh, this is
Smithfield?
by Sir Horace Jones, about 1860. He was a city architect. He was a dear old thing. He was so fat that they had to carve a half circle out of the council table of the RIBA, Royal Institute of British Architects, in order to fit him in.
Really?
He's Sir Horace Jones, very nice man. I never met him, but I often go and look at his portrait and talk to it.
Yes.
Because I think I know him.
Can you imagine what he sounded like?
Yes, I can. He'd have a very nice, low city accent, and you'd get the feeling everything was comfortable and well looked after.
What else did he build?
He built the Tower Bridge. We did the outlines of it, and Billingsgate Market.
When Betjeman left his flat in the city 10 years ago, he went to live in Chelsea, just off the King's Road. It isn't always to his liking. He calls his street Dogmess Walk. But such obstacles don't deter his many friends, Barry Humphries being one, from coming to see him. Barry, how long have you known John?
Very nearly 20 years. I was working it out the other day.
I think so, yes.
Did you met here in London?
Yes.
Yes.
I was playing, soon after I came to London, in a musical called Oliver. I was in the original production
That's
of that.
right, yes.
And one of the members of the chorus showed me a cutting from an Australian newspaper in which John was quoted as saying some very generous things about some gramophone records that I'd made in the 50s.
Marvellous, Sandy.
I'd been a big fan of John's work for many years, and so to find that this admiration was reciprocated was very good. And when he came back to London, I wrote to him. And then we met in Smithfield.
Oh, yes.
And you lived there.
But John, you hadn't been to Australia at that time, had you then?
No, no.
That was later.
I got an invitation from the British Council to go to Australia.
Yeah.
And in those days, I would have done anything. And I thought it was worth it. And I didn't know what.
Did you think you would like it?
I didn't know. I just knew that I must do anything to make money. And so I went and I got the fare. And when I got there, it was nothing like what I thought it was going to be like. It was the most beautiful place. With like being, the light is what you notice. It's like being inside a diamond.
This series of BBC films was a later outcome of that British Council trip.
Ravenswood, northern Queensland, very near the equator. A gold mining town in 1900 with 42 licensed houses and a railway. The railway hotel still stands. The last train has gone. But those who once filled the bar now mostly lie underground on the hilltop, within sight of the mines they once worked, whose wheels are black against the sky. And where on earth is this? This is the stock exchange, the gold stock exchange of Charters Towers. And in the boom years of the 1880s and 90s, this place was crowded. These little shops, either side, were filled with people bargaining about gold. And the greens and purples of stained glass from this roof shone down onto the tessellated pavement, and many a speculator came in here full of hope. Many another came out through this entrance where people were looking down from that gallery between the offices there, thinking he was making his fortune, probably having made his fortune. and look at it now. Comparative silence, utter emptiness.
John, what else is it that you love about Australia so much?
The light, the architecture. It's absolutely beautiful, and the whole, the flowers, it's as though you went to Cheltenham and it was buried in Bougainvillea.
And the people?
Heavenly, and very funny.
What about characters like Sir Les Patterson? Are there many like him?
I think there must be, yes.
I have an awful feeling he's coming here this morning.
I hope not. I told him, of course, that I could effect an introduction between... I'm sorry about this, John. It's, you know, he's the shadow cultural attaché, and he's...
Oh, is it another cultural attaché?
Yes, there are two, but Sir Les Patterson is the shadow cultural attaché.
Is this the door? Oh. Stan, look, keep the Daimler ticking over out there, will you? Things might get a bit highbrow in here. I might want to make a quick getaway. Oh, excuse I.
Yes.
How are you, Sir John? Les Patterson. Barry, g'day. I'm not interrupting. You're not in the middle of a stanza or nothing like that?
No.
I wouldn't want to get in the way of the muse. Very nice, compact little place, too, worth a few shillings on the market at the moment.
Oh, I don't think so.
Oh, you bet.
Very good to see you.
Settle myself down here, if I may. This, Sir Betjeman, is a very much in the nature of a pilgrimage for me.
Oh, I'm very glad to hear that.
Coming all the way from Australia to this book-lined study. Where are we in London at the moment?
In Chelsea, in SW3. It's meant to be a rather bohemian part, or it was.
Suppose you see the odd mini-skirt going past the window?
I suppose, yes. And a good many primrose front doors.
Oh, the painting of the front doors, that's an Australian idea that's caught on over here.
Oh, yes.
Painting the doors different colours. We've made a lot of contributions, really, to the cultural scene in the UK. I have to thank our friend Barry Humphreys for effecting this introduction, because I've wanted to get together with you and talk about a few cultural matters for a long time. I wonder, you wouldn't mind if I just...
Not at all, no.
Cup in. Just a little. Would you care for a drop yourself?
I don't think so, thanks. Or
Oh,
it's
you
a bit
never,
early for me.
Well, it is early, I must admit, but we have a different time scale in Australia, and they're open in Melbourne.
Oh, yes, are they? Yes.
Yes, according to my digital watch. It's a bit awe-inspiring for me, you understand, to be where it's at, culture-wise, in the UK.
Yes.
I see old Barry dressed up there rather smartly. As a matter of fact, I'm wearing my best suit for this occasion.
Oh, it's very nice.
Australian tailors.
Oh, yes.
Bit of Australian craftsmanship, this fabric. I'll give you the name of this little bloke. You send a few measurements over there, he'll run you up, he does a powder blue, a sort of lime green, and fawn.
Oh, very nice.
Fawn is a very nice colour, very popular in my homeland.
Yes.
But I do a lot of travelling, of course. There's a few little creases in it, but holds together very well.
Yes, it does.
And very good for entertaining in, my lord. I'm looking around at a lot of these books that you've got here. It's incredible. Have you read all of these volumes?
No, I have a lot of them for their beauty.
Yes.
I've read some of them, but not all.
I'm a bit relieved to hear that, because I think you and me in public life, we don't get too much time to dip into the odd volume. They're deductible.
Oh.
Yes, books are deductible. My accountant, I was jogging with him this morning, my tax advisor. He said to me, buy books, they're deductible.
Yes, that's a nice idea.
It's a tip. I hand it to you on a plate.
Yeah.
My wife, Gwen, that is Lady Patterson, but Gwen to you, and I are very big fans. I think the first poem of yours, if I may say so, sir, was the one, I must go down to the sea again, where the wind's like a whetted knife.
Yes.
And the Quinquerine of Nivea. Quinquerine of Nivea, from the words escape me for the moment, but beautiful.
Oh, yes, I'm so glad you think so. He's very good, isn't he? The man who wrote that.
Now, you and me, we're pretty good mates. It's funny, isn't it, how you click with a person? I knew we would, though, you know. Big fan from way back. But, excuse me. It's a bit of jet lag. There is a type of Australian performer, let's face it, you know, who earns the odd quid out of tipping the bucket on Australia. That's an Australian expression, meaning undermining perhaps our reputation. I know that you've been there, or we've been talking about your trips. In your experience and the expatriate Australians you meet, what type of person would you say we were?
Very cultivated and refined.
You've hit the nail on the head there, Sir Benjamin. You've hit the nail on the head there. You and me have got a bit in common. I think of myself as a recipient of a knighthood for my services to Australian culture, and I dare say this was the same with you.
Yes, it was, yes.
Just between you and me, do you find that after you got the knighthood, people are putting the bite on you a bit harder?
Yes, they are a bit, yes. They get a little jealous.
I've found the taxi drivers get a bit hungry. I say this is my own experience.
Oh, yes.
But
They
I don't-
recognise you, Sir Les.
I'm recognised, and I dare say you would be, sir,
Well,
because...
I'm rather undistinguished looking compared with you.
Now, I wanted to ask you about Australia. I understand you've been to my homeland a couple of times.
Oh, yes, I love it. I thought I was going to find tin, huts and corrugated iron and palm trees. Not at all. It's absolutely beautiful and full of greenery and rather like England at its most lush.
What cities did you go to? Did you go to Sydney?
Yes, Sydney, Melbourne. I went to all of them, I think. This railway from Melbourne to Bendigo follows the track first made by the pioneer diggers to reach the land of promised gold, Bendigo. 100 years ago, or a little bit more than that, this place was just gum trees, grass and water holes. We came here by train. Now let's see the city that gold built by tram. A broad-streeted city with splendiferous and prominent public buildings. This handsome avenue was mockingly called Pall Mall by the diggers. It was a bullock track, and along it sprang up the first tent and slab hut shops. Now it has a public park, post office and clock tower.
Sounds like you went to a few I've never been to. Canberra's my stamping ground. Did you get to them?
Oh, yes, that's very good, isn't it? Burley Griffin.
We've got some nice modern architecture too over there. There was a lot of old fashion stuff until a few years ago in a lot of the cities, but we're working on it.
Oh, yes. And you're destroying, I think, a fair amount.
Well,
Wheel and the Wrecker.
Developing
Yes.
is the word. Wheel and the Wrecker, you know, our famous firm of...
Yes, marvellous.
I'll tell him, he's a personal friend of mine. He'll be very, very glad indeed that the Poet Laureate remembers his name. Goodness, what a delightful and, I might say, accessible person you are. This is a word that's used a bit these days.
Yes.
Accessible. Oh, well, I won't keep you, Sir Benjamin. It's been very, very nice indeed, sir.
It's been very nice to
I'll
see
just
you.
hop out there. I can see my driver. Gwen, Karen and Craig will be in here in a minute. Don't let them stay more than about an hour and a half, will you? See you later, John.
Right.
All the best, sir. You look, my lord.
Thank you very much.
Driver, would you pull over, please? No, I'll get in the front with you. I think we better stop up at the pub. That was a pretty grueling experience I just had.
We'll rant and we'll roar, as onward we push. One gets rather fed up with endless pictures of people going into bars, as though they were all there is in Australia. And here I am in one myself, hot and thirsty for smooth Australian beer. They got Old Fosters.
Yeah.
Australian houses, inside you see, are very like many English houses. Flowered carpet in the hall, china ducks on the wall, a hat stand and flowers on it. And then round the corner here, here's a room we all sometimes have to use, beautifully decorated, pale mauve, an embroidered seat, and lace curtains, all very like an English house, except you see up there a tarantula spider. Those chimes announced that the film is about to begin. This is the grand assembly of the State Theatre, Sydney, built in 1929. And I should think it must be the most luxurious, lavish, and splendid super cinema left in the world. Its architect was Henry Ely White, who was born in New Zealand, and he became the most famous theatre architect in the Southern Hemisphere. He'd always been fascinated by theatres, and he liked to make his buildings full of surprises and varieties of style. For instance, the ladies' boudoir here is bright with the wings of tropic butterflies, reminding you of the rainforests and of New Guinea. Then this that I'm standing by is the architecture of showmanship. This is a veneer of Italian marble. The antiques you see are very often fakes, but it's a cheerful palace for somebody to come into who's been living a hard life a long way out, let us say in the bush, or in a suburb of Sydney, suddenly to find themselves in ducal surroundings, more than that, royal-looking ones. Over there, talking of surprises, those bronze doors are Australian make, and they lead to watch. An art gallery. The last thing you'd expect to find in a super cinema. The company who put up this theatre gave handsome awards to Australian painters whose work they hung on the walls. I can see over there what's called a gum tree painting of New South Wales, the land which made Australia rich from wheat and wool.
Rather good pictures, too.
Yes.
Well, all with picture lights.
Yes.
Even on the watercolours.
Yes.
And because you admired it, I think that's the only reason they didn't pull it down.
You don't mean it. Well, thank God.
So you
I
can
admired
always
it,
think of
and
that
I
if you're
did.
feeling gloomy.
And what about that marvellous theatre by Burley Griffin?
The Capitol in Melbourne.
That's right.
Well, what they did with that was, you only admired the ceiling, so they destroyed the whole theatre and left the ceiling. And honestly, in the guidebooks it says, and don't miss Burley Griffin's ceiling. He was an Aussie architect who studied in America under Frank Lloyd Wright. and came back with a kind of chunky style,
Rather
Aztec
good.
a bit.
Yes, yes,
You know, kind of jazzy Gothic.
yes.
And awfully good.
Awfully good. Yes.
I remember talking to you a lot about Australian painters.
Oh, yes.
Because while you were out there in the early 60s, you saw a lot of pictures by a lot of Aussie artists.
Tom Roberts,
Yes.
the best of the lot, I think.
Our mutual interest, of course, was Conda,
Yes,
English artist, but his youth had been spent in Australia.
yes. And wasn't Phil May?
No, Phil May was English, but he again spent some time in his early years working in Sydney. And so the Aussies think of him a bit as one of them.
Yes.
And he is rather
He's a very
Australian
brilliant
in his
artist. But black and
laconic
white.
style.
Yes. The country is best depicted by the Australian Impressionists, the Gum Tree School, as it was called, of Hans Huyssen. They showed the real Australia. Before that, earlier artists like John Glover and Pigony thought of their continent as dark, huge and frightening, a sort of Switzerland on the other side of the globe. They showed dense forests and swamps. A modern artist, Arthur Boyd, shows strange bird life. But the first Impressionist painters, in the 90s, went out into the open and revelled in the diamond light and brilliant colour of farms and fields and trees and cottages and womenfolk and sea. Yet permeating everything, there's the menace of the landscape in Drysdale and the aridity of the huge burnt desert as shown by Sidney Nolan. I've got an Aussie painting here that I think's rather good, an Australian Impressionist.
Who is it?
I don't know. It's called Figure in the Bush.
Yule.
Yule. Yes, he's alive.
You like Arthur Boyd too, don't you?
Very much indeed.
John, that's the one that you
Beauty.
couldn't make up your mind whether it was a boy or a girl, isn't it?
That's
That?
it, yes.
Have you made up your mind?
I think it's a girl.
No, it's a girl.
A Sheila?
A Sheila.
It's an Aussie Sheila, lost in the bush.
Yes, that's it.
It might not be the bush, it could be just a corner of her front garden.
Is that the dark of the rainforest out of which I've climbed? Do snakes slither upon this sun-baked rock? Nature is always near in Australia, sometimes too near. But, as a matter of fact, I'm on a tiny island in the middle of Sydney Harbour. Out of the darkness into the brightness. Look at that view of Sydney Harbour, painted by Arthur Streeton at the beginning of this century. It hasn't changed all that much. The real Australia remains. Born primeval, and now many-coloured and brilliant in the sun.
And then there's the Arthur Boyd, which you could get a
Yes,
picture
that-
of up on the wall.
Yes, a lovely
you
Arthur Boyd.
gave that to
You gave
John
that to
and-
me.
Yes.
Yes, and to Elizabeth.
Yes.
Yeah. When was that painted?
Well, I gave that to John, I think in the mid-60s. Arthur Boyd painted it specially. I said, I want to give a present to John Betjeman of an Australian landscape at sunset. He sat immediately down with a cigar box lid, which the old Australian Impressionists used to use because it was the cheapest thing they could find to paint on. And he dashed it off, well, very carefully, dashed it off, as one does when one dashes things off. And it was very wet still We gave it to John. And I think it says a lot about the landscape, don't you?
Yes.
I think the women of Australia must have had immense courage when they first came out with their families, because some terrifying creatures exist. For instance, at my feet here, there's a centipede. You get mosquitoes and flies, but terrifying arthropods like this. If I were a really brave man like David Attenborough, I would pick this up. I can pick it up because this one is of rubber from Hong Kong, but you can see the effect it has. And how did the women of Australia, let alone the men, have the courage to face things like this, which have a very venomous bite?
John, you really like these objects,
I do,
you?
yes. I think they're beautiful things. And they're very friendly, those things, very calm.
Have you ever met one in the flesh?
Yes, in Queensland.
You weren't scared?
They're not fast-moving at all. Very sluggish.
You like centipedes too, don't you?
Yes. I don't mind arthropods at all.
What are they?
Well, anything with backs that move.
This thing?
That's an insect.
Do you like that?
Yes, fairly. It's rather lovely.
It's your love of things dim, isn't it, then?
Yes, I think so. Ignored. Unpopular creatures. I always like them. Always have done.
Oh,
excuse
hello,
me, I'm
Mrs.
sorry.
Orford. No, it's okay. No, we finished.
You sure?
No, we
I was
finished.
going to plug in.
You're going to
The
hoover?
Hoover, yes.
We've just been looking at his insects.
Oh, I don't like them.
Don't you?
Them I don't like. No.
They're not
Them I
insects.
don't like, no.
That's a spider, which is an
No,
arach.
but I don't like them. If I'm going to dust
What,
that...
even if they're dead?
Oh, even if they're dead, if I'm going to dust that,
Yeah.
you know, and half.
We better let Mrs. Alford hoover, I think.
Yes.
All right, then if you're
Yes.
busy, I think...
No,
we're
no,
gonna-
we finished.
Yeah,
We
I
finished.
can go upstairs.
No,
as I
no.
said.
We finished.
You
We
sure?
finished. Yeah, really. And you can dust the spider.
No, thank you. No, thank you. I'm sorry about that, anyway.
It's all right.